So, our third and final speaker on the subject is Dr. Niraj Rai. Niraj Rai is currently working as Senior Scientist and Group Head, Ancient DNA Lab at Birbal Sahni Institute of Paleosciences, Lucknow. He obtained his PhD in Human Population Genetics from CSIR, Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology, Hyderabad. He has also worked as visiting scientist at University of Cambridge and Harvard Medical School. He is the recipient of several national and international awards, including Young Investigator Award and Young Scientist Award. He has published over 40 research articles in reputed international journals. His current research focuses on the nature of the different trajectories of human migrations and settlements in South Asia, as well as diet, early farming strategies, population movement, and intercultural interactions. Using state-of-the-art ancient DNA and population genetics data, he aims to reconstruct the population history of modern-day and prehistoric India that has led to the hyperdiversity defining the Indian subcontinent today. Dr. Niraj Rai will now speak on revisiting the past to narrow literary errors, DNA analysis, and human and animal migration.
Organizers for providing this opportunity. Here I would try my best to explain the genetic diversity of Indian subcontinent, but before going in detail, I would like to answer a question about horses. Yes, we can definitely distinguish wild horses versus domestic horses, as well as we can also go back to past and we can see the origin of horses and how they have admixed with the local horses. So all these questions can be answered using the DNA polymorphic studies. In fact, we are also working on few horse skeletal remains, and we have got authentic data, and that shows that horse domestication center was somewhere in Indian subcontinent, but we are not very much accurate because we have limited data. So maybe next year we'll reveal this result. But before this, I'll go back to our complex population demography and what is the current scenario and how we have admixed and what are the sources of our current genetic diversity. So you know this Indian subcontinent has about 4,635 well-defined population in India, and now the numbers are increasing day by day. We have about 72 primitive types. We have hunter-gatherers. Still, there are many population groups. They are practicing hunting and gathering. We have diversities in languages, social structures, dress, food habits, etc. So, if you talk about the genetic diversity, so I think in this hall we have around 100 audience. And if you measure the genetic diversity, so our genetic diversity must be several fold than the European diversity. So we have huge genetic diversity, and that diversity has accumulated over the time. So we are a nation at least since 5,000 years. So our genetic diversity, genetically I can say India as a nation at least since last 5,000 years. And our genetic diversity and our ancestry doesn't match with any other part of the world. So we have our indigenous ancestral sources, and how we have got and we have attained this much of diversity. I'll provide you a few examples, and I'll also explain about our ongoing work and how we are contributing to understand the prehistory of Indian subcontinent. So for this we use DNA samples, and we collect DNA samples from different sources. We use saliva samples, we use archaeological samples, we also use sometimes blood sample to extract the DNA. And you know, like the source of DNA varies within the individuals, and we all have three kind of DNA. One DNA comes from mother. So, you know, we have mother DNA, and that passes from mother to offspring. And that DNA doesn't go via father to offspring. So that exclusively comes from mother side, that we call mitochondrial DNA. Other DNA that comes from father to son, and that we call Y chromosomal DNA, that trace about the paternal ancestry, and the mitochondrial DNA that trace the maternal ancestry of a population. Third kind of DNA that comes 50-50% from mother and the father side, that we call autosomal DNA. I'm not going in detail about these technical words, so I'm going to jump on few studies that we are carrying out currently. Yeah. So all the archaeological data that suggests that modern humans, they evolved in Africa, and they started migrating to different part of world around 70 to 80,000 years back. So this archaeological data also strongly corroborates the genetic evidences. So here you can see these are the when we compare the Indian samples as well as the European samples, European database, we observed that about 70 to 80,000 years back, the diversity in the mitochondrial DNA lineages started appearing in the gene pool. So that shows that about 80,000 years back, all the humanities, all the human beings were in Africa, and they started migrating towards other part of the world about 70 to 80,000 years back. So what were their roots? What roots they have adopted, and what was the reason? That is a different discipline to study. But here I'm going to focus only Indian subcontinent, and what was the earliest evidence of out of India migration towards the India. And how different language family they started appearing to Indian subcontinent. And here you can see like this is the history book that we read, and as per this history book, we were taught that most of the language families they have come from outside, and they have not talked about our indigenous language family, and most of the language family they were categorized in the form of like Indo-European language family and the Dravidian language family. So this is the first genetic evidences that has come from Indian subcontinent, and this study we have used samples from Andaman and Nicobar, and we observed and we have concluded that the first wave of migration from Africa that have taken place around 70,000 years back, and then first wave of migration were towards the South Asia. Still, these Andamanis and Nicobaris tribes, the Jarwas and the Greater Andamanis, they are carrying the African genes and they have not admixed over the time. So we model those Andamanis and Nicobaris data set to model our original ancestral pools. This is the linguistic demography of Indian subcontinent. We majorly speak Indo-European language, but I prefer to use Indo-Iranian language family, and then Dravidian language family groups, and in this pocket you can see this Austro-Asiatic groups, and the fourth language family that we call Tibeto-Burman, that all the highlanders and all the Himalayan range populations, they speak Tibeto-Burman language family groups. So how genetic data can be useful to correlate the source of these linguistic families, and how migration was migrations affected the dominance of one family groups to the other family groups. All these topics I'm going to cover here. So for this, we have collected about 25 population samples, and that study goes back to 2009 when I was doing my PhD. So this is not my work, but I was involved in this research, and this was the first whole genome sequencing and the first DNA-based broader survey was started way back in 2009. And in this major genetic research, we have found that most of the Indians, about 80 to 85% Indians, they are having two major ancestral groups that we call ancestral North Indian groups and ancestral South Indian groups. So the North Indians and the South Indians, they were having somewhere like some time back, like 4 to 5,000 years back, they were having different ancestral sources. So the the South Indian groups, they are the original inhabitant of the out of Africa migrations, and they that we call the ASI ancestral groups. So you won't find this ancestral match anywhere in the world. So they have their own private ancestral groups, and it doesn't match with any other population of the world. Second is ancestral groups that we call ANI, that ancestral North Indian groups, and they have somehow they have Central Asian and Western Eurasian ancestry. But this is a question: when that ancestry came into India and that formed ANI, that we call ancestral North Indian. So this ANI has little bit of Western Eurasian ancestry that we sometimes get confused with the steppe ancestry or the Aryan ancestry. Uh, when this ancestral source were formed, the migration started taking place, and few groups of ANI also, they started migrating towards South India, and they started mixing somewhere around 4 to 5,000 years back, and after extensive mixing events over the thousands of years, this is the current scenario of modern India. If you see any of the modern Indian samples, you will find ANI and ASI ancestry. So all the modern Indian populations, about 85 to 90%, they have no genetic discrimination. So our genetic makeup is same. There is no Dravidian gene, there is no Aryan genes. So all the genetic makeup of Indians are same. So mostly this mixing happened around 5,000 years back. And so to go into further detail, we started sampling more and more populations all across the India. And now we have more than 450 population groups across the India. All the samples are coming from all the major four linguistic groups. And when we started analyzing, we found that no, it was not correct. So we can't put all the Indian population into two ancestral source, ANI and SI, but we have another ancestral groups, and we were not having any idea about these ancestral groups and this genetic isolates. So here you can see this blue line that shows the Indian cline. So majority of Indians, they fall into these ancestral groups. So on this basis only, I said that India was a nation since last 5,000 years before present, because you won't find this ancestral match with any other population of the world. So they are the Han Chinese. You can see the Chinese diversity is, I think, 40, 50 times lesser than the Indian diversity, because in China, majority of the population, the Chinese, they are the migratory people. So Han Chinese, they are not local to the Han region. So in this Indian cline, you can see few are the outliers, few groups of the Bengal, few groups of the Kerala, few groups of the Uttarakhand. They show some kind of outliers. You can see the Shia Iranian from Hyderabad, but they are the recent migrant from the Iran, so they are falling into different clusters. If we talk about the Parsis and Jews, they have little bit different ancestral sources, so they also fall into the outlier. But except these populations, most of the groups, they fall into this model. So now I'll be talking about this the confusion, how we often get confused with the Central Asian and steppe ancestry because of the different events of migrations that have taken place over the time. Most of these migrations were not documented, but few we have well documented evidences. For example, Parsis, they arrived to India around 6th, 7th century AD, and they first landed to Sanjan, is a place in Gujarat, and they were about 100 to 150 in number. And you will be surprised to know that the Indian Parsis, they have the original Zoroastrian gene pool. If you compare the Parsis, Indian Parsis with the Iranian Parsis, you will find 10 times higher pure Zoroastrian ancestry into the Indian Parsis, because they were not forced to mix. And India was the safest land that time, and everybody got opportunity to settle here, to grow here, and to establish their communities. Likely, the Jews, when they arrived to India around somewhere in 3rd, 4th, 5th century AD, and they have settled and in some pockets of Indian subcontinent. Mostly they are found in Cochin, few colonies you can find in Mumbai, and few in Kolkata. So we collected samples from all these population groups, and we have analyzed their DNA data. And we found as Indian Jews, they came here around 40 to 50 generations before present. If you count one generation for 25 years, so around 700 years back, they have come here and they have settled here. The Jews, they have come here and they have heavily admixed with the population in Kerala. So definitely they have somehow West Eurasian ancestry, but that ancestry has been diluted significantly. With that ancestry, the people get confused that from where this ancestry has come. So definitely this ancestry has already documented, and definitely we'll get around 5 to 10% of the West Eurasian ancestry. Same like in Parsi also. Parsi also will get a lot of West Eurasian ancestry. And this is a technical word. I'm not going to detail, but what we do, we divide our DNA database into different ancestral components. So this here you can, we have modeled the ancestral chunks into different colors. So blue colors and these green colors. So this blue color shows the majority of the South Asian ancestry, and this light green color shows the ancestry that is coming from the western region, mostly from Iran and other part of the Central Asia. So this is the special distribution of the Jewish ancestry. Here you can see the population and cultural assimilations. As soon as they arrived into Kerala, they started mixing with the local populations, and now they have completely admixed, and you can't distinguish on the basis of their ancestral chunks or their genetic basis, but on the basis of their rituals, their languages, you can distinguish. Same like in Parsis we have analyzed around 45 samples, modern samples, and around 16 samples from the archaeological collections. And we have compared, and we found that mostly the majority of populations were male, and the 20% population were female, and they have migrated to Gujarat, and then now they are happily settled in India. But we often get confused with their ancestry. So I'll skip this slide. Other evidences of migrations that has taken place in during the Portuguese era in 15th, 17th century AD. Lot of slave trade was in India, and lot of ancestry from the Eastern African region also has been brought to India, and then they are mixed in the population, and maybe not now, after 1,000 years, somebody will confuse like how this African ancestry has arrived in Indian subcontinent. So yeah. Same in northeast of India, we are working on a site in Shivsagar. This is the Ahom dynasty, and we have got samples from Moidam. It's a burial practice of the Ahom royal burial practices. And when we compare the modern Ahom and the ancient Ahom, they have a lot of differences. So as soon as they have settled in Indian subcontinent, they have settled in Assam, they started mixing with the local population, and then their entire demography has been changed. But if you compare, if you try to look at the past, their ancient DNA, their genetic makeup was entirely different. Here you can see, this is the ancient Ahom samples. They goes back to 600-700 years back. So their ancestral pattern is quite different, and they are the modern Ahom populations, because they are heavily admixed with the local populations. So when mixing takes place, it takes place in an exponential manner. So like one generation, then second generation, and third, fourth generation, the original ancestry will be around 12.5% in third generation. If you go back to fourth generation, the ancestral component will be 6.25%. So like this, it goes on. So the ancient Ahom, they have a strong connection with the Thailand, and we have assumed that around 60 generation before present, the major migrations have taken place from the Thailand, because like India and Thailand connection was well established through the sea route, and lot of inward and outward migration was in that peak that time. Now coming back to the the past, the very, very past. And as Dr. Manjul and Professor Vijay Sathe, they have mostly covered about our glorious past. I would say glorious past, and I don't know about others, but I consider it as a glorious past. From here, we have analyzed about 25, 26 samples we attempted, and with one samples we have been successful, and we were able to extract DNA from one individual, and that individual was a female sample. Here is a burial, and the age of this burial on the basis of cultural material that goes back to 42 to 4300 years before present. We could not get direct radiocarbon date, but on the basis of these cultural materials, archaeologists, they have decided the date, but I am still not convinced, because I don't believe on this accurate date on basis of cultural artifacts. But that date was definitely older than 4000 years before present. We extracted DNA, but it was a very challenging project, because the sample was highly degraded and we were unable to extract authentic indigenous DNA. And in most of the cases, you will get bacterial DNA, environmental DNA. But somehow we have managed. It's a long, it's a big procedure. I'm not going into detail. We use my lab. So we compared this entire population of India with one individual data, and we found that this individual is having majority of ancestry coming back from Andamanish populations, 40 to 50%, because as in the previous slide I said, the Andamanis were the first settler in Indian subcontinent about 70,000 years back. They have contributed their ancestry to the modern day South Asian populations. If you go back to 70, 80,000 years before present, in India there were no Homo sapiens. There were a lot of hominids were roaming here and there, but they all got vanished. And so since that time, the Andamanis related ancestry is surviving in South Asia. So few of them, they have settled in the mainland, and majority of them have migrated towards Andaman and Nicobar. Andaman, not Nicobar. So the majority of ancestry in this lady sample was coming from Onge, Andamanis and Nicobaris, and 30 to 40% ancestry that is matching with the Iranian populations. So then we compared this Iranian ancestry. That is very important question, because how Iranian ancestry is appearing in the ancient samples and the modern day Indians, that ancestry has been diluted. When we compared, we found that the Iranian ancestry in this individual and the present day Iranian, they are not having any similarities. So the Iranian ancestry that has appeared in this individual, that is coming from a hunter-gatherer group. They were staying in the Iran about 12,000 years back. So about what happened around 11,000 years back, the ancestral source of present-day Iranians and this Harappan were common, and we don't know where are these groups and where they are living. They could be in Ganga Plain also. They could be anywhere. But the modern-day Iranians and the contemporary to Harappan time Iranians, they are sharing a common ancestor, and that is going back to 11,000 years back. That time there were no agriculture, there were no agro-pastoralism, but they shared their common ancestry that goes back far back into time. So on the basis of that, we concluded that the agriculture practices must be indigenous, because they are not sharing any ancestral components with the agro-pastoralist group of Iranians, but they are matching with the ancestral group of agro-pastoralist Iranians. Those were hunter-gatherers. So agriculture must be indigenous, and their ancestors, they were common, but we don't know the location of their ancestors. Maybe they could be the Mesolithic population of Ganga Plain or anywhere else. And we also found that there was a site in Turkmenistan and Iran, Gonur and Sahare Sukta. Contemporary to Harappan, there are a lot of burials were found in Turkmenistan and Iran, and we found a 100% match with those populations. Then we started estimating their ancestral source, like how in Iran and Turkmenistan Harappan ancestry was appearing around 4,500 years back in time. And then we found the source of ancestry was Harappa, what was Indus Valley. So continuous trade was there. I won't say out of India migration, because all the Turkmenistan Iranians, they were like, they migrated from Indus Valley, but somehow majority of their individuals, their samples were matching with the Harappans. That could be due to the course of long trade, could be any reason. Genetically, you can't explain the reason. You can see the data. So this data could make a sense of out of India migration. That can be a beginning step. If we analyze more data, that hypothesis might be correct, might be wrong also. Another site, I'm working with Dr. Manjul, and he has done, I would say, greatest excavation of 3 decades at least. And this discovery, I would say, is the biggest discovery of this century. So in this Sanoli site, they have found chariot, they have found royal burial. So we are trying to analyze the samples from this royal burial context. And with very limited data, we have concluded that the Sanoli individual is having no step ancestry. So the data is marginal. I'm not confident to tell about the ancestry, but I am 100% confident about the step ancestry. So there are no Central Asian ancestry into this individual. That shows that the existence of horses must be indigenous, and the knowledge of chariot making system was indigenous, and the royal burial, that was not a foreigner, that was an indigenous human population. The same we have also found around 200 to 300 BC in South India. The South Indians populations, they also were not having step ancestry until 300 BC. So when did this step ancestry has arrived? This is the matter of question, and then we are working on it. And we have other evidences also from Killadi, Tamil Nadu. I am working on these samples, and we have found the cultural continuity and the genetic continuity also in this region. So in Tamil Nadu, all the ancient samples, they are completely matching with the modern populations. So they have a long-lasting cultural and the genetic continuity. Similarly, in the northeast of India, all the modern day northeast India, they having some kind of Han Chinese ancestry. So we often get confused that they have somehow genetic connections and the cultural connection with northeast of India. When we analyzed samples going back to 3,000 to 4,000 years back, Neolithic samples from the Naga Hills, we did not find any Chinese ancestry in those populations. So they have big match with the population from Burma, but they have no any genetic similarity with the Chinese populations. Their culture is indigenous, they have huge diversity in their languages, their customs are like highly diversified, and their genetic affinities are completely local. They have matched with the Tibetan populations, but not with the Chinese populations. The last slide, I am going to talk about the Kashmir Valley. We have recently got the samples, and we were rushing to extract the DNA because I can't control my breath. The samples were fascinating, and that going back to different time intervals, and that goes back to 3 phases, phase 1, 2, 3. We have got DNA data from phase 2 and phase 3. So in phase 2 and phase 3, we did not, in the phase 2, that goes back to 1200 years BC, around 3,000 to 200 years old. And in these samples, you can see this BR3. This sample, we did not find any step ancestry, but in these samples, this is going back to early historic, we are finding significant amount of Central Asian ancestry, and the date of this sample is going back to 2nd, 3rd century AD. So this is the like a time we could say, and this individual is having significant amount of ancestry that can solve this question, because they could be first or second generation of the migrations, and then we can accurately trace out the source of the step ancestry in the South Asian population. I would request not to share this this slide anywhere because this is unpublished data and it's very sensitive data. Similarly, we also found a strong genetic connection with the Bali populations. Last year, I have gone there and I have got a lot of archaeological remains from Bali. And so far, archaeological data suggests that around 3rd century BC, they have a strong trade between this Indonesia archipelago region and the South India. And when we compared this Bali data set with the Indian populations, we found a strong match with the Odisha population. So Odisha and Tamil Nadu, they have, the second match was the Tamil Nadu. So and that time goes back to 6th, 7th century BC. So definitely this connection goes back earlier than that 6th, 7th century AD, BC. So I would say around 100, maybe 100,000, 500 BC, they have somehow like connections. And I'm not going to correlate any epic story with this, but there are many possible way to reconstruct our epic knowledge on the basis of these genetic evidences. Another migrations, we have published this work in 2012, and I'm not going to talk about the last two slides, R1, A1. So this was assumed to be a Aryan gene, like some layman, the opinion, they correlate the R1, A1 ancestry with the Aryan gene, but this is not correct. R1, A1 gene or this R1, A1 haplogroup is considered to be mostly accumulated into European region. And in 2002, 2003, there were not much data from India. So whatever the published data were found in, were analyzed in European context, most of the ancestry were matching with R1A1. The Europeans were mostly having R1A1 gene. The Indians, we were not having much data, and due to lack of data, it was postulated that R1A1 gene must have brought with the Aryans. When we started analyzing samples and when with the funding enrichment, we were having big resources, and then we established our data set. When we compared R1A1 ancestry in Indian context, we found that the genetic diversity of R1A1 ancestry is 2.5 times higher than the Europeans. So if a genetic diversity is higher of a lineage, that assumed to be a source of the ancestry. So this work we are going to publish. This very soon we are going to come up with this extraordinary publications. So you can see this is a diversity of European populations all across the Europe and Central Asia. And here's the diversity of R1A1 ancestry in the South Asian context. So we have 2.5 times higher diversity, and this is the heat map you can see here. We are going to come up with this hypothesis that R1A1 must have been evolved in South Asia, and then it must have been migrated from here to other part of the world. And these are all the genetic data, and this is unbiased data. If something is coming that steppies they have come around 1500 BC, definitely I'm happy to accept because I am not biased. So we are working holistically, we are working for science. So this is our few new results that I have presented here. Thank you so much. The time I won't answer because Dr. Manjul is here, he can answer this question.
He has not mentioned anything about South Indian this thing, that is the problem. He has mentioned only about North Indian structures and other things. So at least I am reminding you to tell something about Kennedy and other stuff.
An Adichanallur excavation is going on as a part of development of iconic site there. The earlier also excavation was done in Adichanallur and got several urn burial there. And then that Adichanallur dated back to 800 BCE, and now the recent date around 1000 BCE. We got a few samples, but still its investigation is going on, and we got the several skeletal remains within the urn. The huge urn also, the smaller urn also surrounding the huge urn. And then there is multiple layer of that urn burial also. There is 2-3 phases of within the entire settlement. So yes, a study is going on at present, and we got a lot of samples, and we in future we will publish the entire, either in the DNA and other investigation also. Even Kiladi, ASI has done some work at excavation at Kilari, and also now State Archaeology Department is doing some excavation at Kilari, and also nearby one habitational site is also there in Kiladi, and also the Adi Chandlur area. So that is the very, very huge site, having a lot of, not only the Adi Chandlur, but nearby there is a very big site also there in the similar to Adi Chandlur, having a lot of urn burial there also. Actually, it's a time to understand the whole multidisciplinary approach for understanding of these urn burial culture, because there is no such a detailed study has been done on habitational site. So this is the burial site, but we have to do the excavation at habitational site also to correlate the burial practice with the habitational site. So now ASI has taken excavation, so in future. Thank you. Thank you very much.
We
Can I
take one
please,
last
yeah.
question from Anand.
Yeah, I would like to congratulate Dr. Rai for the wonderful presentation. In fact, the whole session of Dr. Rai and Dr. Manjul and Dr. Sathe has been absolutely unique and exceptional. And it just tells you the prestige of PLF for having such a session that you would be hard-pressed to find even in scientific conferences. So once again, my congratulations to
Thanks.
the speakers as well as the organizers. My question is very simple, Niraj, which is that have the three of you collectively hammered what I can call the last nail in this so-called Aryan invasion migration question? And I say this on 3 counts, which are as follows. You look at the excavation of Rakhighari, where you find absolutely no steppe ancestry dating back to before 1500 BC or 4,000 years. In fact, there is a tremendous continuity of civilization, as you mentioned. You look at Sinoli, and 4,000-year-old, you find a chariot, obviously would be driven by a horse. And finally, your exceptional data that you showed in the last slide, as yet unpublished, where the so-called Aryan gene R1A1, in fact, turns out to be possibly having an origin which is in India. So these 3, and of course the archaeological dating of Rig Veda itself, do not these 4 mostly scientific population genetics oriented observations hammer in the last nail in this so-called leftist gobbledygook of Aryan invasion theory?
Yeah, you are very right, and I think the last last slides which I have presented here, Burjaham and R1A1, they could be a last nail of Aryan invasion theory. But being a scientist, I won't say that is Aryan invasion theory. We are going to finish this conversation, but we will present data for sure. And on the basis of that data, it's the job of historians. They have to put last nail. And I will provide concrete and solid evidence, and no one will have any questions on our data. So this is a promise I would like to make.